I think given the hour and out of respect to everybody's time, we're going to get started, and anyone else coming can drift in. The most important part of the presentation will be Jane West's presentation coming up. I am Paul Owens. I'm president of 1,000 Friends of Florida, and Jane is our policy and planning director, and Haley Bush, who you have met on the way in, is our outreach director. So we scheduled this meeting to hear from residents in the community about your concerns about growth and development trends in Martin County and how we might support you in preserving the environment and quality of life of this community and this county. There we go. And as many of you are no doubt aware, 1,000 Friends of Florida was co-founded in 1986 by Hobe Sound's own Nathaniel Reed, one of our state's and our nation's greatest conservation leaders. We scheduled this meeting at the suggestion of Nat's son, Adrian, and we're delighted to have him with us today, along with Nat's daughter, Leah. We're grateful to them and their brother, Nathaniel Jr., for continuing to support us in our important work. We lost Nat Reed nearly 3 years ago, but we haven't lost his vision for a state where we protect our environment and our quality of life even as we grow. We're grateful for all the members of this community who have generously contributed to our efforts to carry on Nat's vital work. I brought copies of the newsletter. You may have seen the stack outside on the table that we published in the fall of 2018 as a tribute to Nat's life and work. If you haven't already grabbed one, please feel free to take a copy on your way out. Make no mistake, Florida is still growing. Our current pace of adding more than 800 residents a day translates to absorbing a city almost the size of Orlando every year. And that ratchets up the pressure for development throughout Florida and threatens our environment and quality of life unless it's carefully managed. 1,000 Friends of Florida is a statewide organization whose mission is to promote growth management and environmental stewardship in all of Florida's 67 counties. But we continue to maintain a special interest in protecting the environment and quality of life from incompatible development in Martin County. Throughout our history, we've won a series of important victories for smart growth and sustainable development in Martin County. We established the Palm Beach and Martin County Green Initiative to promote sound community planning and effective advocacy in both counties. We helped Martin County develop and maintain its award-winning comprehensive plan and urban services boundary. We published a 40-page guide outlining how to promote both economic development and smarter growth in Martin County. And we held 2 workshops in the county to talk to citizens about planning for the kind of future that they want. In 2018, we testified before the Martin County Commission against a proposal from Harmony Ranch to create a mega development outside the county's urban services boundary on more than 2,600 acres designated as agricultural west of Interstate 95 and north of Bridge Road. We pointed out how the proposal violated the state's rule to discourage low-density residential and commercial development, otherwise known as urban sprawl. Commissioners unanimously rejected the proposal. In 2019, we urged the governor and the Florida cabinet to oppose a petition from Harmony Ranch to create a community development district on the same agricultural property. This district would have circumvented growth limits in the county's comp plan and weakened its protections against urban sprawl. We forcefully expressed our objections in a letter to the governor and cabinet, then urged our thousands of followers to reinforce the message by contacting those leaders. And although CDD petitions are routinely granted by the governor and the cabinet, in this case, they unanimously rejected this one from Harmony Ranch. Now, Jane, who I've introduced to you, continues to stay on top of issues in Martin County as a member of the advisory board of the Guardians of Martin County, and she'll be talking about some of those issues after I conclude my presentation. Since we're just a few weeks removed from the regular session of the 2021 Florida legislature, I do want to point out that our work in Tallahassee to promote better growth management and conservation policies at the state level has benefits for Martin County or any other part of our state facing development pressure. 4 of our 5 staff members testified at times before legislators in favor of good bills during this session and against bad bills. It was a tough year for our legislative agenda, although we did stop some bills and reduce some damage from others. Meanwhile, it was a good year for funding conservation and water quality. With our strong support, legislators dedicated $400 million for conservation, more than $400 million for Everglades restoration, and hundreds of millions of dollars for water quality projects. There is a lot more to do, and we'll continue to push, there we go, for more progress. We could use your help. Please tell your legislators to defend rather than undermine growth management laws. This is not a Tallahassee issue. This is an all of Florida issue. Ask them to keep investing in protecting vital conservation lands and agricultural lands like those on the Florida Forever and Wildlife Corridor lists, and ask them to maintain their support for Everglades restoration and other water quality investments. Finally, when we held our workshops in Martin County in the fall of 2018, we concluded with the following recommendations to protect the county's undeveloped land, its waterways, and its quality of life. Uphold the county's urban services boundary to protect its rural and agricultural lands from incompatible development. Implement policies to promote more compact development to save land and make communities more livable and walkable. Promote infill and redevelopment, and this is important, in a manner sensitive to Martin County's unique historic, cultural, and environmental concerns. And target new developments to areas near existing communities and infrastructure. These recommendations are still timely today. To do your part as a citizen, stay engaged, help shape and participate in critical planning processes, attend hearings, meet with elected officials and staff, talk with your neighbors, and share your knowledge of why planning matters. And we ask that you support us, 1,000 Friends, in our efforts to build better communities and save special places in Florida. Help us keep going to bat for a better future in Martin County. So now I'm going to turn over the program to Jane to provide some more details about this year's legislative session and talk about some of the growth and development issues looming in the county. We'll leave some time afterwards to hear from you.
Thank you, Paul. Let's see. Hello, everyone. I am Jane West. I am the Policy and Planning Director for 1,000 Friends of Florida, and I have also served as an environmental and land use attorney here in Florida, serving the public interest for 23 years now, and a brief stint up in Maine for 3 years. So I'm a member of both the Maine and Florida bar. However, I made a big transition over to 1,000 Friends of Florida a couple of years ago and took off my litigation hat and put on my lobbyist hat. And let me tell you, it has been a wild ride, especially during this pandemic up there in Tallahassee. So I'm going to briefly touch on some of the bills that we worked really hard on this legislative session and give you a little context about how they are going to be impactful to your quality of life here in Martin County. We are seeking a veto on 3 different bills. HB 487 regarding impact fees, and I'll go into a little bit of detail on this later, HB 421 on property rights, and HB 487 on small-scale amendments. I'm not going to delve into that one. However, these are still headed towards Governor DeSantis' desk, and so we are actively seeking a veto because of the negative impacts of these 3 bills. So let me touch first on impact fees, because this has a huge effect, especially for new development outside the urban services area here in Martin County. What this bill does, HB 337, basically curtails local government's ability to raise impact fees on new development. So what does that mean exactly? What are impact fees? They're basically user fees, right, that kind of shift the burden of all that infrastructure and that expanded growth back to the developer so that isn't foisted upon the existing residents. So if you make the decision as a developer to develop outside the urban service area, you're more than welcome to do that. No one is saying you can't do that, but local governments need the money to help pay for the infrastructure involved in that. That means extending roads, sewage infrastructure, utility infrastructure, schools, fire safety. All of that needs to be extended because that developer chose to go outside the existing infrastructure line. That makes sense, right? However, with this particular legislation, that's no longer going to be an available option for local governments because they are going to be restricted to 12.5% increases per year. And that is a significant curtailment. Just for a little bit of context there, last year, the villages, Sumter County, raised their impact fees by 80% because they looked at the math and they realized that they could not accommodate that the new growth that the villages was causing within the county without imposing a significant impact fee like that. So in Hillsborough County, it was a 300% growth, expansion of impact fee percentages. So these are really important for local governments. It's really one of their only tools left. The only other option that they have, and we have a couple local government officials here, so they probably know this better than anyone. The only other option, if they can't raise impact fees, they have to raise taxes, or they have to face the reality that you're going to have diminished public services, or worst case scenario, both. So this is definitely going to impact Martin County going forward, and we are requesting a veto on this. And this goes a little bit into the details, the wonky fun details of impact fees. I'm not going to bore you with that. But, you know, this is essentially what we're trying to prevent, right? Sprawling, single-use, low-density residential development that requires a significant amount of infrastructure. The next one that I think is highly applicable here in Martin County is HB 1101 and HB 421, the relief from burdens on real property rights. This basically expands the scope of the Burt-Harris Act. Many of you might know that this is Florida's kind of unique version of a taking statute. We've got protection at the federal level under the U.S. Constitution for private property rights at the state level, and then Florida has some of the most robust private property rights in the nation through the implementation of the Burt-Harris Act, which was passed back in 1995. This particular bill, this legislative session, is going to basically be Burt-Harris on steroids, right? What it does is it changes what constitutes an action of a government entity. So typically, the developer goes in with an application, and if it gets denied, that developer, that property owner, can seek a takings claim against that local government, right? Now, that trigger rolls back to whenever that local government adopts any sort of ordinance, resolution, regulation, rule, or policy. If a property owner thinks that that negatively impacts their property, they can make a claim against that local government. So think about the fiscal impacts, especially on a small community like that. If you open up the door and apply it to when the ordinance is adopted. That's a whole lot of takings claims that I don't think any local government in the state of Florida, quite frankly, can fiscally afford. So we are against this and have requested a veto. I'm now going to briefly touch on a lot of the state preemption and limitations on home rule that we are increasingly seeing at the state level. Personally, I really just don't get it. The Tallahassee folks really hate it when the feds impose any sort of preemption on them. So why they are turning around and doing it to local governments is really kind of beyond me. But some of the ones that you might want to pay attention to, Senate Bill 856 is the state preemption of energy infrastructure regulations. So basically, local governments are not going to be able to mandate things like electrical vehicles charging stations, which is really unfortunate, right? I mean, we're all trying to get to the point of low greenhouse gas emissions, and this is definitely not the way to go, to take that out of the purview of local governments. Another one that definitely is going to have impacts here in Martin County is Senate Bill 266, home-based businesses. So this would prohibit any local government from regulating home-based businesses. So you could potentially buy in a residential neighborhood. There are exceptions, like they have carve-outs for PUDs and master plan communities. But if you move into a residential neighborhood with the full expectation that your neighbors are also going to be residents, right, that is no longer the case. They can have a commercial operation with an unlimited number of independent contractors. There's a cap on employees, but not independent contractors. And the local government has no way to regulate that. So we find this really problematic. And Senate Bill 401 is Florida Building Code. This incorporates the provisions of Senate Bill 284 with respect to building design. So now local governments are not going to be able to regulate building design elements, everything from the minutia of windows to garage doors. And this is really unfortunate because we've got a lot of unique community characters, especially here in Hobe Sound. Imagine if our local government wasn't able to mandate certain design criteria. Everything would look like what you see on the right, the standard model home, instead of this really kind of classic, unique architectural home that you see down in Coral Gables. And Hobe Sound has many examples of that as well. So this is another takeaway of home rule. And another preemption over the restriction of utility services. So this was just a complete assault on home rule, which we are against. Big Ag also won big this legislative session. Solar projects, commercial solar projects, are now going to be a permitted use in any designated agricultural land use category. They are no longer going to have to seek a comprehensive plan amendment or a zoning change in order to put a commercial solar project on ag land. Legal notices, there's no longer going to be a requirement for how the public is made aware of legal notices. They can use an online publication through a government agency. They don't necessarily have to publish it in your local newspaper anymore. So that's something to be aware of as well. And we also have the statewide flooding and sea level resilience bill. This was a good bill. So, you know, obviously recognizing that we are going to have sea level rise issues here in Florida. It's a slow start. Honestly, this should have been implemented a decade ago, but at least it's progress in the right direction, right? A lot of bills didn't pass. I'm not going to go into all of these, but I'm going to touch on two that I think are pertinent to Martin County. First, Senate Bill 62, Regional Planning Councils. Thank you so much to all of you. We made a very strong push when this bill was first filed. All of us were like, oh my gosh, they're going to dismantle the regional planning councils? What, are you kidding me? So we pushed strong and hard to make sure that this bill did not move forward, and it did not. So we really want to thank all of you who listened and paid attention to our email blasts. They actually work. And then Senate Bill 1504, House Companion HB 1133. This is the Coastal Construction and Preservation Bill. It would have required DEP to issue permits for seawalls. So this was really problematic. Again, thank you so much for all your calls and emails to your respective lawmakers to shut this one down. However, I think we can expect to see both of these bills surface their heads again in future sessions, so something to watch out for. SB 1522, House Bill 1225, is the implementation of the recommendations from the Blue-Green Algae Task Force that Governor DeSantis first set up when he took office. If you recall, the state was just inundated with massive fish kills. Cyanotoxins were causing human health problems, and so he pulled together a highly respected Blue-Green Algae Task Force. They made a whole bunch of recommendations after meeting with folks from across the state, and then they were supposed to implement those recommendations. That's what this bill would have done, and it died. So you basically had a couple years worth of public input, a lot of energy spent on these recommendations, and it completely stalled out, which is really unfortunate because I think we're about to see another really bad summer heading into hurricane season and the rainy season with the Indian River Lagoon, given the height of Lake O right now. Now I'm going to segue off of the bills that were passed and not passed and our veto requests from this past legislative session. And I'm happy to take any questions when we have our question and answer period towards the end. It's really important to us to make this a listening session as well so we understand what your concerns are. And one concern that we have heard again and again and again is the Discovery Land Group's proposed development. I will tell you what I did. From our standpoint, it's really important for 1,000 Friends of Florida to gather as much information as possible. I did this when I was in private practice, and I was happy to see when coming on board to 1,000 Friends that they had a very robust rubric of what they look for in terms of criteria to engage. So one of the first steps that I took was I made a public records request to the Martin County planning staff to get an idea of where we were in the process. This is their proposed PUD master site plan. You know, this is kind of the developer's bubble wish list in terms of what everything is going to look like. I can tell you 9 times out of 10, the initial master site plan that a developer submits for their pre-application meetings with the local government is never what the PUD ends up looking like in reality. It goes through multiple revisions. Where this stands with the county right now, and we have a commissioner here that can set me straight if I'm wrong, but from my understanding and conferring with your planning staff is that Discovery has had a pre-app meeting. They are going to be required to seek a comprehensive plan amendment because, I'll change to the next slide, there are a significant number of acres outside of the urban service area. So you've got a small strip of the property, 37 acres on the north, that are within the secondary urban service area, which you see here in purple, which is already designated as rural density, so you can have residential development on that. But the remaining 1,493 acres are designated ag. So you're going to have 2 things that need to happen, right? They're going to need to seek a comprehensive plan amendment. And because this is over 10 acres, that is going to have 2 different processes, right? You're going to have first your transmittal hearing, where that proposed comprehensive plan amendment is going to be subject to a public hearing. You have public input, and then it is sent up to DEO, which is the Department of Economic Opportunity. DEO reaches out to other state agencies, like the Regional Planning Council, the Florida Department of Transportation, the School Board, DEP, Florida Fish and Game, and it gets input from those agencies, and they collect that material over the course of 60 days, and then they send it back to Martin County, and Martin County sets up another public hearing, which is called the adoption hearing. So you have 2 opportunities there, right? The transmittal hearing and the adoption hearing to weigh in on the comprehensive plan amendment. You've got 3 here in Martin County? I'm sorry? Okay, yes, and I was going to go into that as well. There's also, simultaneously with a comprehensive plan amendment, and this is going to be the case here with Discovery because they're seeking a PUD, they are going to have to seek a rezoning, okay? And that's a little bit of a different track. And from a legal standpoint, it's a lot different too. A rezoning is a quasi-judicial process where basically the commissioners are going to be tasked with interpreting existing policy to see if this proposed development complies with that existing policy, right? A comprehensive plan amendment, by contrast, is quasi-legislative in nature. So if you have a quasi-legislative process, it means you are actually changing policy. You're not interpreting policy, you are changing your policy. Changing a comprehensive plan is a much, much bigger deal than rezoning. So it needs to be taken under serious consideration. If you're going to change the policy, there better be a very good reason, compelling reason why, and the commissioners have the very difficult task of combing through the entire comprehensive plan to see if the proposed change, the proposed amendment, is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the proposed plan amendment. We have done a preliminary review of the Discovery Comprehensive Plan Amendment, and we do have concerns with various goals, objectives, and policies, but this is very early in the process, so we are going to be still in the information gathering mode when it comes to this respective development, but I will say right here and now that we do have concerns based on what we have seen in the comp plan. And with that, I'm going to conclude and ask if there are any questions with respect to discovery, the process, citizen engagement, what steps you can take. I know Paul touched upon that very briefly, but any questions in terms of what is facing Martin County? And this is, by the way, this is our first in-person meeting since the pandemic. So we really encourage you to engage with us and let us know what are your concerns so we can help guide you through the process and address them. Anyone? So are you referring to the impact fees legislation? We are pushing very, very hard on a veto for that. So is the Association of Counties, right? They have made a veto request. But yeah, obviously if the bill passes, that is really going to significantly tie the hands of local government officials to allow them the ability to make growth pay for itself. So, you know, I don't think a lot of local governments understand that. I'm sure the folks here are the exception, but there are really far-reaching implications. And that particular bill, Maggie, is retroactive in its application. So it goes back to January 1st. So it's a really, really bad bill.
I was just going to add a few more things about that bill. As Jane mentioned during her presentation, the annual cap is 12.5%. Now, there is a provision in the bill that says you can exceed that cap, but in order to do so, you have to produce a study within a certain period of time, then have a couple of public meetings and supermajority votes at both of those public meetings. So it's almost as if the legislation was written to say, this isn't really a cap, and if localities need to exceed the 12.5%, they can, because it's set up a politically and practically untenable process for exceeding the cap. So it's a way to exceed the cap on paper only. I can't imagine it's ever going to happen. Part of the problem with impact fees and part of the reason why localities, counties, and cities get so far behind is it's kind of politically toxic to address them. And so by the time they muster up the political will to address them, or by the time conditions force them to address them, they have a lot of ground to make up, which explains why in Hillsborough County and Sumter County, and I believe in Orange and Osceola County too, you've seen very large impact fee increases. That makes, you know, home builders very angry because it may throw their numbers way off, but it's because it's making up for lost ground. one of the people who testified at one of the legislative hearings said that rather than place this cap, this arbitrary cap on local governments, what they really should have been doing is coming up with some requirement for local governments to address periodically their impact fees so that they wouldn't get in the position of having to make up and having to do, you know, double or triple digit impact fees. It'd be easier, it would make a lot more sense, it'd be a lot more responsible governance if they had a system like that. You know, sort of the way that local governments periodically address their comprehensive plans. In this case, it would make sense, though, to do it more often than local governments address their comprehensive plans.
I do, because I am one of the attorneys that has sued the state of Florida to challenge the constitutionality of 7103, which, by the way, is still pending, and we just were granted oral argument, which is going to be on June 15th at the first DCA. It will be virtual. But yeah, that was an extremely toxic amendment that was slipped into that bill, and what it provides for is if a party challenges a development order, which is a rezoning, not a comp plan, a development order, then if they sue in court and lose, the developer can recover their attorney's fees. Now, we have been proposing bills the last two sessions to basically undo the damage of 7103. This past session, we tried to make that bill as narrowly tailored as possible. So the bill language that we proposed would have precluded intervening parties from getting prevailing party attorney's fees. And that was in line with what the judge ruled up in Leon County at the lower tribunal. It's up on appeal now. But Judge Cooper ruled, well, it was actually dicta, but he made the comment that no interveners should be allowed to take advantage of that bill because they voluntarily subjected themselves to the risks of litigation. And so we hope at the very least that that sort of dicta could become law, and we hope at the very least that the first DCA will affirm that particular thought process by Judge Cooper. The significance of that, and I know I'm getting a little wonky here, but the significance of that is very often you may have, you know, a citizen, say Maggie Hurtella, or an organization, say 1,000 Friends of Florida, challenge a local government in court. Now, usually they can work something out, but what happens, the minute it gets really adversarial, and you guys can probably attest to this, is when you have the developer who owns the property at issue intervene in that litigation. Then all the gloves come off because the developer's lawyers usually are billing at rates, you know, $500, $600 an hour, way above what the counties are paying their lawyers, right? So that's where the fear of the attorney's fees come in. You know, most organizations can probably deal with the local government's attorney's fees, but they can't deal with that intervening developer's attorney's fees. They just become skyrocketing, cost prohibitive high. But yes, we've been trying for the last two sessions. We hope to have a good ruling, but it's been a very difficult case. However, we have a dream team on it. We've got Carol Arline, Professor Joseph Little from the University of Florida School of Law, and Richard Grosso, who I know all of you are very familiar with, and he was actually my mentor in law school. So that's where things stand on that. Right. Really good questions. And, you know, so many times, and I've been doing this a long time, a developer and even a local government's attorney will say, this doesn't have any precedent-setting effect. I can assure you it 100% has a precedent-setting effect, because what you look at in terms of the surrounding land uses is compatibility. And if you're the donut in the hole and you're the only little piece of ag surrounded by residential, you're going to get that residential designation because of the compatible surrounding land uses. It makes it a consistent land use. And that all makes sense. But that's why we have an urban service area, right? That's why we have that boundary line that 1,000 Friends of Florida was so instrumental in establishing years ago. Moving outside that line is something that we are against fundamentally for numerous reasons, not only here in Martin County, but in Miami-Dade County. We are part of the Hold the Line Coalition, where they are seeking to expand into the Everglades. This is a concept that we have held firm on for the existence of the organization. So it definitely does have a precedent-setting effect. In terms of the second part of your question, what are the chances? I mean, it's a tough balancing act, but Martin County has one of the best comprehensive plans, in my opinion, in the state. And there are criteria within that comprehensive plan that we need to make sure that every applicant adheres to when they seek a comprehensive plan amendment. But again, it's two different tracks. You've got the rezoning and the comprehensive plan amendment. The rezoning would be subject to the 7103 prevailing party attorney's fees provision. The comprehensive plan amendment change is not considered a development order under state statute, so a challenge to that would not trigger that 7103 provision.
So what do you think the odds are that you can get to veto this, special agreement with developers with respect to classes?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely have a lot of protection here, but they were already afforded that protection when it comes to frivolous lawsuits. We have a Florida statute here, 57103, where if you bring a frivolous lawsuit, you're already going to get hit with the fees. So this, you characterized it beautifully. It's the creation of a special class that's entitled to prevailing party attorney's fees. And what it has done in the few years that it has passed is shut down citizen engagement throughout the state. Yeah, I mean that was my practice.
No, and the basis of the constitutional challenge that we're pursuing now is it's a due process case, because if you cannot practically engage for fear of financial ruin, then you are essentially denied the due process you're entitled to as a citizen in the planning process. One other thing I wanted to mention was we did float an amendment, and we got a senator to introduce the amendment. I think that was on the floor rather than in committee. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I won't embarrass the senator by identifying him, but I don't think he did a very good job of speaking up for the amendment. The amendment was very well crafted by Jane to clarify that frivolous suits were not protected from this provision. That it was only intended to protect citizens filing legitimate and well-founded claims from having to pay the legal fees of the prevailing side. The senator who originally was responsible for this amendment said, he spoke against it and said, spoke against our amendment and said he was trying to stop drive-by lawsuits. And clearly, our amendment was crafted in a way that it provided no protection for drive-by lawsuits, but it was intended to restore the rights of citizens to enforce the consistency of comprehensive plans. And this is really the way it's done, is through these kinds of challenges. So hopefully we will, strike oil in the appellate process, and we will win our lawsuit. But if we don't, we'll keep trying to get that changed in the legislature. Yeah.
Yes, it's prevailing party attorney fee. So yes. Right. Exactly. There are some limitations. They were able to carve out a few exceptions within the bill, but that is correct. It's supposed to have a residential appearance from the outside, but you can tuck a lot under a residential appearance. Yes, they can have a daycare. They can have a funeral home. I mean, they can do a lot of businesses, under this provision. Yes, it is. The Florida League of Cities did some great work, and initially had made some progress on this bill. So it's still adhering to local noise, variances, ordinances, things like that. And unfortunately, those, provisions got gutted in the final version. Yeah, absolutely. And without the ability, if this impact fees bill passes, there is not going to be a choice. Martin County is going to be stuck in that really challenging position of either providing inferior public services, or having to raise taxes, which I know you do not want to do. I mean, no elected official wants to do that. So this is a very real and pressing problem, which is It is, because you're foisting that financial burden on the existing residents. One thing I'd like to point out is, part of our mission is promoting sustainable development. And there's a whole slew of things that fall within the basket of what constitutes sustainable development. But one of the very first things on the top of the list is location. Is this proposed new development in a location that is existing designated area for development? So that is something that we would definitely look for at Discovery, and the fact that it's outside of the urban service boundary is an issue. Another issue that we look at is affordable housing and socioeconomic diversity. Walkability, and I'm not talking about walkability within the community, but interconnectivity with other parts of the community. These are all issues that we look at. With a price point, I believe, starting at $3 million, I don't think anyone's going to sit there and say Discovery is promoting affordable housing. Affordable housing is a desperate need throughout the entire state of Florida, so that continues to be a priority for 1,000 Friends of Florida. You want to handle that one?
Well, I was going to say, Jane talked about Sumter County. The village is raising its impact fees, but in the year or so before the villages did that, the county had to raise property taxes across the board somewhere around 30% for everybody in the county. And that was an increase that was driven by the need to catch up on infrastructure in the county that had fallen behind because of the growth. If you look on our website, 1000fof.org, we have a section with webinars, we do 9 months a year, once a month. They're on conservation and planning topics. And we did one, I think it was back in February. You can find them. They're all archived by a planning consultant who looks at the economics of development, of sprawling development, and shows how that kind of development just never pays for itself. And it's a Ponzi scheme where it inclines local governments to cut deals with other new developments in hopes of trying to make up what they've lost from the other development, but they never catch up.
Correct. So very good. I'm very impressed. Actually, yeah. So a constitutional property rights taking is a complete divestment of your real property expectation values and your quiet use and enjoyment of the property. A claim under Burt Harris is just that the local government action is causing an inordinate burden on you. So that's a pretty low threshold. That being said, Burt Harris has actually worked quite well over the last couple of decades. Only 2 cases have resulted in actual monetary judgments in favor of the property owner. So the overwhelming majority of cases, local governments have prevailed, but it still serves as a very chilling effect because it's just the intimidation of the lawsuit being filed. They still rack up a lot of attorney's fees, like millions of dollars in attorney's fees. So the threat of Burt Harris is probably the most toxic part of it, not the actual judgment. Only 2 since 1995, yeah. That's why you have so many retirement communities, 55 and up in the state of Florida, is to avoid the impact fees associated with schools. But I've never heard of that being a mandate. One other thing I will add specific to Discovery is this concept of planned unit developments. PUDs are basically a miniature little world of its own zoning regulations, right? So it's actually asking for a deviation from what currently exists, and they're going to have their own master development agreement with the local government in terms of what they are binding themselves to. The problem with PUDs, in terms of what I have experienced over the years, is that they are malleable, much more malleable than seeking a variance. All you have to do is seek a modification to your PUD, which happens quite a bit. So, you know, we do have concerns about PUDs. I'm not sure it's been the best path for the state of Florida. It's extremely hard to track all of these miniature little cities, essentially, with their own zoning codes. I sat on the City of St. Augustine Beach's Planning and Zoning Board as their chair for multiple years, and PUDs are a problem. You know, they exist in their own separate world. And if they do come in for a modification, more times than not, because people have already gone well past the fight and years later, more times than not, those modifications are granted. So just something to keep in mind with PUDs. Any other questions? So the current number of vacant zoned residential single-family acreage within Martin County exceeds 5,000 acres that's vacant. So you're nowhere near that threshold. Yes, conceivably at some point in time, your infrastructure is going to go all the way to the line, and this is what Miami-Dade and Broward and Palm Beach are experiencing. So you're going to have to weigh whether or not it makes sense to extend that infrastructure. But when you have that much capacity still within the urban service area, that should not even be a consideration at this point because you've got so much acreage still inside the area.
It's hard for the common citizen to understand because as a lifelong citizen here, I just drive up and down Martin County and I think, oh my gosh, I hadn't seen that before, I hadn't seen that before. I mean, it really feels like we are filling up to the gills. So what you're saying is that it's not.
I just checked the Martin County website.
Yeah. To move the urban services line even as far as, which isn't very far, but even that far.
They're in the fine print in the comp plan, there is a reference to residential capacity having been, you know, whether or not residential capacity has been reached before something is developed outside of the urban services boundary. And
sure. There are, this is really small, and I apologize about that. 321 proposed residential units in Discovery, and yet you have over 5,000 vacant zoned single-family residential acres within Martin County. So you can definitely squeeze those 321 units in that area. Yeah. Okay. Good to know. I wasn't around. That was Thomas Hawkins that was involved in both Harmony and Pineland Prairie. I do know that there was some land swapping into conservation, and so the net acreage change within the urban service area was, I don't know if it was negligible exactly, but it was nominal. Here you're dealing again with 1,493 acres outside that urban service boundary, so that is not what I would consider negligible. But yeah, 1,000 Friends of Florida, I actually talked to Thomas Hawkins about this morning because he was there, and I just wanted to understand a little bit of the history and context of his engagement on Pineland Prairie. And we did not take a position either in support or opposition. We did oppose Harmony, but we did not support or oppose Pineland. We helped, according to Thomas, work behind the scenes to make it a little bit better and put some teeth in the master development agreement and ensure that, you know, references to conservation areas were actually recorded deeds and not just designated on the PUD. Sure. Yeah, great question. I meant to address that. And Abel and Maggie, sitting as fellow board members as guardians, can probably talk to you about this as well. But with the Loxalucy project, there was a willing seller. That status, I think, is a little jeopardized now because of Discovery. You know, you guys are in the hotbed of land speculation in Florida right now, right? And it's going through the roof across the state, but it's especially hot here. And so the price point that was not agreed to on paper, but just kind of a verbal agreement back in the fall has now been pulled off the table, and he is seeking a revised appraisal of the property. And presumably because of, you know, Discovery looking at this property very closely, that's going to potentially, I don't know, the appraisal hasn't been submitted to us, it's going to jack up the price. And so that's going to make fundraising and ultimately land acquisition of that parcel that much more difficult. The Loxalucy project was... Absolutely. And, you know, that project is important not only for the aesthetic buffer that it's going to provide along Bridge Road for a really long stretch of that road, right? But it also has a lot of significant environmental benefits, including, as you mentioned, water quality and water sheet flow under Bridge Road. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, it's a very important land conservation project. I have been a strong believer since I moved here to Florida in my teens that the only way to save this state from itself is to acquire land in perpetuity. And so, you know, we do work with land trusts, and I would hate to see that deal fall apart, but I would characterize it as a little bit precarious right now.
Any more questions? We've gone a little over our time, but we've had some great questions. We are all, you know, we are open to follow-up questions. This is just the beginning of the dialogue. So please follow us online and feel free to email us with your questions, and let's stay engaged. One point I want to leave you with is that I don't think it was a coincidence that the governor was here. I believe it was just last week to talk about water quality. I think the governor listens to this community, to this county. So I think if you all speak up and continue to stay engaged, you have the real potential to shape policy in a positive way. So keep showing up for meetings, keep contacting the governor and your legislators and your local leaders, and you know, that's the best way to carry on the work that we've been carrying on from Nathaniel Reed to try to protect our environment and our quality of life. Maggie.
Yeah, can I ask one last question? I won't ask who was the wrong way. Did we have anybody in the Martin County legislative delegation who fought against the bill?
No, not that I'm aware of. I will say that Senator Harrell was the sponsor of the bill in the Senate. We didn't have it on the short list that we went through today, but the bill that repealed the bill from a couple of years ago establishing the toll road network, that was a terrible bill. It would have been environmentally ruinous to western rural Florida. That has been repealed, thank goodness, and Senator Harrell was the sponsor of the bill that repealed it. The bill that she sponsored will allow for a highway construction, but it'll be in other parts of the state and probably parts of the state where it's justifiable and needed to deal with existing traffic congestion, not sending bulldozers into pristine rural areas and Springs country and things like that. So I would put that in, that good word for Senator Harrell on that. But as far as those other bills that Jane went through, the ones on our veto list, I'm not aware of anybody pushing back from Martin County, unfortunately.
No, those were votes actually in support.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, if no more questions, thank you so much, everyone, for your attendance. I appreciate it.